Hey PS friends, today I'm going to walk you through some barbecue competition thighs. We're going to be using our Bee Sting Hot Honey Rub and our Bourbon Barrel Whiskey Barbecue Sauce. Now the first thing we have to do is trim up the thighs, which is taking off the skin, trimming off a bunch of fat, squaring them up so that they're uniform, and then replacing the skin once it's seasoned. So these thighs are from the store, and you can see that they are hardly uniform shapes or even sizes. So what we need to do for the competition's sake is make sure that they're all the same. Because what the judges want to see is they want to see consistent size, shape, color, everything, so that each bite will be the same for each judge. Now this guy right here has a ton of extra skin. You can kind of see some bloodline in there. So we're going to take that off, but we want to reserve most of that skin. And we're going to start peeling. There's an edge of the thigh where the skin will come off really easily. And that's where you want to start. Just start pulling it back, and there'll come a point where it's pretty taut, and you're going to have to cut from there on. So you're gonna take your knife, I use a chef knife the whole time, and right in that seam, just gonna start working the knife and pulling away with the skin. You really don't even have to cut much, because you start breaking those connective tissues and they just separate pretty easily, skin to meat. So we're gonna set that skin aside, gonna put that back down there, and then we're gonna trim up our thigh. So right now, it almost kind of looks like a heart, and what we need to do is we need to make that square. These are bone-in thighs, which you'll see on the back, and we'll get to that in a minute. But what we're gonna do first is on the top, is we're gonna take off any fat. And when I say fat, I mean extra fat, because when we smoke it, a lot of this fat, this really thin stuff, is gonna render off, but it's not a high enough temperature that it'll melt off. So we need to get rid of it, because that's not something you want to bite into. So there's a little line of fat over here to my right. We're just gonna take that off. Now you don't want to go too deep into the meat, but you do want to be pretty particular about how much you're taking off. Some over here. A little up top. You really kind of want this to look lean once it's done. And we all know chicken thighs have a higher fat content than white meat like a breast, but we still want the excess fat to be taken off. I'm gonna flip it over and start working underneath. Now right here you can see the tendon. And you definitely want to cut that out, because if you bite into that, it's not gonna be good. Sometimes you can pull them, sometimes you have to cut them out, but make sure that is gone. On this underside, you'll see a lot of fat here again too. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start going in and taking that out. Anything like this right here, where you can see some bloodline and those connective tissues, that needs to come out. What we're looking for in the final product is a really tender, juicy bite with no gristle, no extra fat, because you want that dark meat, which has a higher fat content to begin with, to absorb the flavors and just be a really consistent, good textured bite. So there's a fat line right there. This recipe too is a really nice way to kind of impress your neighbors maybe, or your in-laws or something like that if you have company coming over. I almost guarantee it'll be unlike any chicken thigh, especially bone-in chicken thigh that they've eaten before. All right, so we've got our trimmed. Now we need to square this up. See how it still looks like a heart? We're gonna need to square up the top and bottom and a little bit on the sides. The sides aren't as important to square up because we're gonna roll them underneath eventually, but we want the top and bottom to look a little more uniform. So, on the underside, that bone right here is basically gonna be the cutoff point. So anything, when you flatten it out, anything above that bone, we're gonna cut off. So we're just gonna go right across there. Now you can save this for soups and, you know, pulled chicken, whatever you want, but so we're gonna set this aside for later. So we have that top squared. We need to square the other side. And the way the bone is cut off, there's some joint there, and there's some fat, and there's some tendon. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna cut through that bone, just below that knuckle. We're gonna cut through that bone to square it off. Now, make sure your knife is sharp. And what I do is I use my palm, and I'm gonna pop that knife, and it's gonna go right through the bone. So I'm gonna set it just below that knuckle, give it a little pressure, pop. You hear that crack, and you can finish through and pull, okay? Now you wanna check to make sure you don't have any fragments that could, hurt your throat. But after that, that thigh is ready to be rolled up. Now it's time to take care of the skin. So the skin has a lot of fat on it. It's one of the best parts of the chicken when it's roasted because it's higher temperature and a lot of that fat will render off. For this recipe, we're smoking them. Smoking is not gonna be a high temperature like an oven roast would be. So we need to take off some of that fat because it won't render and we don't wanna bite through that. So we're gonna get this as flat as we can. And we're gonna take our knife in a pretty extreme angle like this and work our way across so that we can pull off the fat, leaving just the skin. I kind of work with the corners because then you can almost do it with one hand and don't need to hold and make it awkward. So I'll start in the corners like this, just little movements, kind of pushing down towards the skin a little bit as you move through. And then that should take off most, if not all of that fat. So this is just straight fat that can be discarded. But then here, you'll see really thin skin that is almost translucent. And you need to do that for the entire skin. So there we have a really nice thin skin. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that thigh that we squared up earlier and we're going to roll it underneath itself. We're going to take our skin and we're going to rewrap it. So rewrap, tuck it under, as much coverage as we can. And that's what it's going to look like when it's all done. In a few minutes, when I'm done with all of these, we're gonna come back, take the skin off and season the thighs, and then they'll be ready for the smoker. Now it's time to season with our dry rub, which we're using Bee Sting, which is a honey chipotle rub. It's gonna add a really nice kick underneath and get those salts infused to start. But what we wanna do is, now that we've got them all trimmed and skinned, we're gonna actually take that skin off so we can get some seasoning underneath and directly on the meat. So I'm just going to peel these back so that we know which belongs to which. Now the fun part about this too actually is when you're trimming these, some of these come out a little small and some are bigger and the skin doesn't always match what the thigh will look like. There's nothing saying that the skin that comes off of this one has to stay on here. If that skin fits better on this thigh over here, feel free to switch them up. Because what the end goal really is uniformity. Okay, so I'm gonna flip these over so we get the underside first. And this is our Bee Sting rub, but at no point are we actually going to rub the meat. Because we're gonna sprinkle it from about a foot up so that it falls and evenly coats the meat. Because once again, uniformity, we want every bite to be the same. Not gonna go too heavy. Try and get it nice and even on each thigh. Flip them over and do the same thing. Sprinkle that on there. Now that the meat is actually seasoned, we're going to wrap them back up in the skin and give them one last seasoning. I'm going to roll up that meat first and then get the skin on there and wrap. Kind kind of tucking everything underneath. There we go. And once again, we're going to season that skin now. Okay, we're all seasoned. I'm going to put these in a tray, and then they're going to be ready for the smoker. For the sauce, we're going to combine our bourbon barrel sauce, and we're going to add some butter to that, and we're going to heat that up so that the butter melts and we can whisk it in and stir it all together so it creates our barbecue sauce glaze. And we want it hot because once we dunk the chicken thighs into this, we don't want to cool those thighs down at all. We want there to be an even temperature cooking process for those. So we're going to pop these open, get a wire rack out, and again we're going to dunk these in because we don't want to use a pastry brush. Pastry brush would leave marks and we just don't want that for competition thighs. So we're going to dip them, set them on that wire rack so we can tack on that barbecue sauce with a little more smoke. We just pulled these off the grill, and now's the part where we find which 6 we're going to present to the judges. I'm not really presenting them to judges, but this is the process that you would do. You'd get your clamshell, you'd line it with either kale, some leaf lettuce, or in our case, parsley, curly parsley. Just gives that bright green offset color for the presentation. And we're going to line it with 6 thighs, and then I'm also going to try them, and we'll see how they turned out. And there we are. There's our competition pack. And then, like I said, I'm going to grab one of these guys for us to try. So when you pack the box, what you want to do is you want to use your fingers and just try and grab that bone so that you're not touching the sauce part of the chicken, because that'll lead to inconsistencies in your texture and the look of the sauce. All right, let's give it a try. You don't want it to be fall off the bone tender. You want there to be some sort of bite to it. So this turned out really nice. You can definitely get the heat from the bee sting. The sweetness and the buttery from the bourbon barrel comes through really well on top. And I'd be pleased to submit this in a competition. So hopefully you get to try this recipe. If you are a competitor yourself, hopefully you get to try some of our products, because I really do think it's a great combination. Until next time, I'm Chef Jed here at PS Seasoning.